Okay, Santa.
I'd like to entertain the standing motion from Evelyn to approve the minutes of the last meeting. Can I get a second? Second by Peter. Discussion, amendment? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried, and the floor is yours.
All right. I handed out copies of my agenda. You should have those. The only thing I have is a request for a transfer of funds. We're looking to transfer a total of $1,926 from our existing, or within our existing budget, from the salaries regular code, into furniture, furnishings, and office equipment. We would like to purchase some new chairs. Our chairs are very old. They're not comfortable and they're starting to fall apart, so we'd like to get those. And also, we had an electric time stamp, which can't be repaired and it's broken, but that provided us with a indisputable record of when things are received. Right now we're using a rubber stamp that just has a dial. You can really put whatever you want on it. So if we ever had to account for that, there may be a question that's disputable, so that's what the transfer is for.
Make a motion.
Second.
Evelyn makes a motion and Jim seconds. Any discussion on this request? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried.
And we also have the pending item. I was here in October and I spoke to you about our vacancy and doing abbreviated minutes. So we've been doing those and just want to get a feel for whether we should continue to do those or whether we should go back to the old way. You know how you feel about the minutes?
I'd be prepared to continue. I've always been a fan of minutes that are elongated, more complete, but be happy to continue whatever the pleasure of the. Sometimes when you go back in time to look at the information, sometimes a more complete version is helpful.
Yeah, I agree with. I think a long version is gives you you don't know until later when you look back what's important, but if over the short run on that.
Well, we're wrestling with this in my town for general board minutes, and we're doing audio recordings, and they all get posted online too. We run into I'll get it from my board members. Well, you didn't put down that I said this. Well, it's not a transcript. It's not a verbatim report. And if you want the fine details, you can listen to it, or in this case, you can watch it to see exactly who said what. But take up an awful lot of time trying to please everybody by putting in everything that everybody wants. So I appreciate the abbreviated version.
Well, I've done a lot of going back to the 80s, looking at town minutes, and you do get a much better feel for what was going on by getting the full version. But if you need it right now, I mean, one blip in time isn't gonna, as long as you put what I say.
Rachel?
I think if the 80s had YouTube, Jim, you'd find it very effective as well. But I appreciate the fact that it takes a lot of time to do verbatim minutes, and I like the abbreviated version. I think having that YouTube, being able to go to certain minutes to review things and hear actually the tone of voice and intent of people really sheds a lot of light on for me, the discussions that take place. So I think that given your time constraints, and if this comes down to having to add another person to staff or cut something else out to do, line by line minutes, I'm definitely a fan of the abbreviation.
Well, are we going to keep the videos forever, or what's the life?
They can be archived as long as we want to keep them. I've been told by IT they just expand wherever they need to, so it's not like they're going to go away. In the past, we used an actual cassette tape, and we kept those for a certain number of years, and then they were destroyed.
Right.
These, with the digital audio and then the video, they're just kept indefinitely. They go into their own little storage area, and that's where they're kept. I would note that initially we had done this thinking we have a vacancy. We wanted to make that, instead of full-time, we wanted to make it part-time. However, now we're running into a problem where the county attorney's office is going to have a complete changeover. So a lot of the things research projects and things that they would have done are going to fall back on my office.
Yeah,
so that's
I'm not you
With
know.
the, abbreviated minutes, we were thinking, we would have to keep the abbreviated minutes and fill our position full-time at this point. I
I'm not-
talked to Paul about that yesterday, and he said that this would kind of open the door for a lot of scenarios, where if we fill our position full-time for now, it'll help us get over the hump until the county attorney's office is back up and running. But then that full-time position could be shared between my office, his office, and the county attorney's office, because at times they need to cover the mailroom, there's filing in the county attorney's office that always needs to be done. So that person would stay full-time, but it would be more shared. And it is budgeted for full-time next year, so we're not, and there will be a savings, just not as great as we had hoped, because we will have benefits costs, assuming our new person wants benefits. But there will be a salary reduction. We'll have to reduce it from, I think it's budgeted at 37 now, and we would wanna pull that down to 34. That's our typical starting level. So one way or the other, we would still have to amend the table of organization to change the salary amount. We were just trying to get a feel for whether you wanted to stick with the abbreviated, go back to the full, how we wanna, but we will need that person, that position, we need to fill it. We're getting into crunch time now where we really are feeling the pinch.
What about continuing on for another 90 days with abbreviated minutes and bringing it up again? And I have an open mind.
Sure.
So that, maybe the new board feels comfortable also with,
Certainly, we will be, I had talked to Chairman Garrity, we'll be, at some point during the first quarter, we'll be polling the board, to
Okay.
see how they feel about maybe changing the way we do meetings, instead of doing all mornings, doing morning and afternoon. Maybe there are certain supervisors that would prefer to get their resolutions from the website versus, printed, but that's not something we wanna force on anyone. We wanna make sure everyone's happy with the way things are going. So we're gonna do that, and possibly we can do that, we can pull for that too at the beginning of the year. However, we're not opposed, we're just mostly, we wanna move to get the position filled
I
one way or
appreciate
the
that.
other.
Thank you.
Bud?
You can wait, in my opinion, if you want, I've only got 28 days to go. Less is best, as far as I'm concerned, abbreviate minutes, but where you wanna research, if you wanna go back and listen to the recorded, you got tape recordings also, or if you want to go to the YouTube, I think you can get as much detail as you need.
So, do you want a resolution for this, or just a consensus?
Well, we would need a motion to, approve the filling of the position, which, like I said, right now it's full-time.
Right.
So we'd like to fill it full-time, but we wanna reduce the salary, so we would need a motion to approve filling that position and to amend the table of organization to reduce the salary from where it is now to 34.
I'll move that.
Motion by Bud,
I'll second it.
second by Peter. Further discussion? Rachel?
Yeah, just the way this reads on the pending item, it says to return Virgin, in order, and I know I'm only reading a brief part of the sentence, but to identify whether vacant position at clerk's office should be filled part-time or, that's not based on whether there's abbreviated minutes or not. You're just saying either way, you think right now, given the discussions you had with Paul yesterday, that you need that full-time position. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
at the beginning, we thought we would just change it to part-time and we'd go along, but we hadn't realized everything that was going to be happening with the county attorney's office will be getting more than we're doing right now, just to help out until they're up to speed. Because it takes a little while, there's a lot of history that Shelley and Terry know, and, you know, research projects and things that they just know where to find them, and new people won't. So they're gonna come up and we'll have to dig. So it does take an extra, you know, it's nice to have that extra body to send them down to the basement, start pulling files.
Just have a question, and maybe Martin could help me with this. When we talk about abbreviated minutes, in a legal setting, in a court of law, judge, attorneys, would abbreviated minutes work in that environment?
Well, under the open meetings law, it's stated that meeting minutes must consist of recorded motions, resolutions, official business. They do not call for word-for-word transcripts of meetings, verbatim. So the only thing that is necessary under the open meetings law is that if you were to make a motion, the motion would be made, that would be recorded, that would be made by Supervisor McDevitt. The topic of the motion would be recorded. The supervisor who seconded it would be recorded. Any follow-up discussion presumably about the motion would be recorded, and then a roll call vote on the motion would be recorded. If it's a roll call, it's necessary. If it's simply a aye, nay, that's all that's recorded. So really, that's the only requirement. So to answer your question, if, in my view, if a court would be reviewing meeting minutes for sufficiency, the court would not say that a meeting's minutes are deficient because they're not verbatim. I hope that helps.
Okay, let me carry that maybe towards the extreme, okay? Maybe the follow-up question, and again, because I don't know, if, when we're in a court of law, testimony was given, the verbatim required under those circumstances, not a town hall meeting, but just we're in testimony and...
Typically courts, there is a transcript of the testimony that is provided, yes, typically.
But, thank you.
That's the same, we've asked around for a while we're discussing this in Johnsbury, it's the same as what you just said, the various opinions we've got, official actions.
Yeah, I think I actually
Yeah.
talked to you about this a
You
few
did.
months ago, yeah.
So, is there any further discussion on this? All in favor? Motion carried. You're off the hook. You go next, Paul?
I would defer to the Board of Elections, if it's all right. Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
We have board elections.
Well, I mean, thank you. Sorry. You got one of these? Sure. Budget.
First thing on our agenda, request to, attend our conference in January in Albany. Information is there, it was emailed. We're under GSA rate. The best to stay. Go ahead.
I'll move it, yeah.
I'll second it.
Motion by Peter, second by Evelyn. Discussion? All in favor? Motion carried. Are you all done?
No, I'm not. Our budget changes. Mary Beth and I actually had a chance after our crazy November elections to sit down Monday morning and discuss and prepare our budget for 2016. And we went online to look at it and found that we were cut by $65,000. We put a call into Rob Lynch to find out where those cuts were made. He directed me to New World, and we found that we were cut in 410 supplies by $45,000, which is our ballots. That's where our ballots come from. Going into 2016, we're looking at 4 elections. The second place was cut was 439 for $20,000, and that's our inspectors. We spent $30,000 on our inspectors for November's election. Times that by 4 elections is 120. That exceeds our 110 that they gave us just there. That's not even training. Going into a presidential year, we also have to do what's called the local registration days, and we need to staff some extra hours, a night until 9 o'clock, and a Saturday for 4 hours?
No, 2 to 9.
2 to 9, 7 hours. There would be no money left to pay those inspectors to cover those hours. I have several things that, our budget was discussed on the 25th. The only thing that was mentioned of cutting was our travel and conference fees, and we were fine with that. We got an email from Mr. Dusick on 10/22. My fault, I did not reply to all from that to see if there was any cuts that any departments could be made. We replied that going into 2016, having those 4 elections, that we did not find anywhere that we could cut costs. So it was a surprise to us, needless to say, when we sat down to do our books for 2016, that we didn't have the money that we asked for. And we would like to not have to go to contingency. That would be our busiest time. We already have to prepare our budget in August and September next year during our busy time.
We discussed this at the budget meeting about the 4 elections this year, and you know how you're trying to hold things pretty steady. So, does the committee have any comments that they'd like to make on this situation?
Yeah, I just maybe one observation. I think that the underlying credibility of the electoral process is very important. To be under the gun with maybe the unavailability of funding on an issue as important as elections, I feel very uncomfortable with that. And I would like to look for a reasonable mechanism, legal mechanism to restore the dollars that they've lost.
Bud?
It's been a long time since we talked about this, so honestly, I don't remember. I know when we first started with the new machines, one of our complaints was that we had to have so many ballots, and we really weren't gonna use them. I guess I'd like to know how many ballots we need now, how many we use on a normal election, and what does that $45,000 that you're talking about represent?
Well, no election is normal.
Well, no, you don't have to tell me that.
I mean, just take our election that we went through this past year. We had some contentious races, so Mary Beth and I sit down and do kind of like the history of the turnout at this point. And then we take the races that are concerned. Luzerne, nothing major was going on, so we were able to order last ballots. Chester, 2 brand new people, several offices, big race. Of course, we're gonna order more ballots for that. Thurman, same instance. So we have to take all those little things into consideration at that time. We don't know now, today, what next year is gonna bring for elections. We have to take each case as it comes to us and decide on the ballots that are ordered. Right now, we do base of history of percentage of turnout, 10% more a little bit, but then again, we take each of those elections and look at them and see what possibly could happen and order ballots accordingly. And all right, every person that's able to vote, active and inactive voters, are supposed to be able to go to the polling place and get a ballot. We don't order like that, but we do have to take all that into consideration ordering ballots.
Evelyn?
I got a couple things. First, to piggyback on what you're saying, there's also the instance where sometimes the ballots are in error. I know for Thurman this year, for the primary, there were ballots that went out that didn't have my particular race on it, so obviously we had to reprint and resend, so we need a little room there. I guess the first thing I'd like to do is generally, when the budget officer does this, they have a reason. So I'd like to hear from the budget officer, but I think that should the committee decide that we want to reinstate this money, I think that what Peter's looking for is basically my only question is can we do it now, or do we have to wait till after the new year? But that it would be a fairly simple thing to pass a resolution and forward it on. It has to go up to finance to appropriate the money out of the unexpended fund balance and restore it in the budget. The only question is, can we do it now, or do we have to wait for January? But before we even get to that, I'd kind of like to hear from Frank as to, how we ended up here today.
Well, despite what you might think, I do have a reason. First of all, I've read where your budget came in level or steady, and that's not the case. It increased by $54,231. $23,000 more in expenses, and a decrease of $31,200 in revenue. And you reduced the number of voting districts from 70 to 45, I believe.
44.
44. So that's about a third less. Okay, well, maybe you won't have a third less inspectors, but maybe a quarter less inspectors. a list here that goes back 8 years, since 2007. And, the most you've ever spent in the 410 supply line was in 2012, which was before election year, $55,000. So you had $61,462 in that goal. So you had an extra $500 there. And, same in the, 439, highest year that was, spent was, 2009, and that was about $99,000. And there's $110,000 in there, so if you add the two together, you had $17,500 more than you ever spent. You know, so, as budget officer, and as the person that is gonna raise taxes on people, I don't see why you think you have to have a $65,000 cushion on the backs of taxpayers. There's multiple other things that the county has spent money. I understand you might not wanna have to go back to the board and, request more funds, but I don't think the board's gonna let you run out of money. I don't think that's the case at all. I think having $17,500 more than you've ever spent in the last 8 years, I think we're in good shape.
My comment on that would be that 2012 that you're comparing it to, there was an incumbent president, so there was only a Republican primary. So the potential this year is, we have no choice but to prepare for any potential that's going to be coming. So there's the potential of a U.S. Senate race, there's the potential for a U.S. Congress race, those are in June. So we could have a presidential primary, multiple parties. We're going to have a non-incumbent presidential race. So the voter turnout has the potential to be higher. Our federal voters are usually, if there's a non-incumbent president, you know, all of a sudden we hear from everyone who's moved out of the country that they now want a ballot. So all of those things come into consideration. I can't tell you in 2012 exactly if we had any local primaries that particular year because I can't say that I researched that. But there's a potential that we did not have a local primary for state or assembly. That doesn't mean that that's going to be the case again this year. We may not have had, you know, to staff for multiple parties for those different things. I mean, I can't say that I know that, but.
You know, myself as budget officer, I don't think we can, budget departments for what is. I think you have a surplus. You have more than you've ever spent in the last 8 years by $17,500. There's a problem. The board is here and more than willing to fund what needs to be funded. I don't think that we need to raise taxes just to give you a comfort level.
Well, we have a fiduciary responsibility to the state constitution and the federal constitution. And as Beth said, technically, we're supposed to have a ballot available for every single voter, whether it's an active voter or an inactive voter. We're already compromising by ordering fewer ballots than the state law requires. I mean, technically, the state says you can order 100% plus 10% for people who make errors. We don't do, our first year, I'll say we probably did close to that because we didn't know how it was going to work with people using the new voting systems and filling in the bubbles, how many ballots were going to be returned because they were flawed. So having done that and realizing that it was an easier transition than we had hoped for, we have lowered the cost. So I mean, we have an obligation to fund it on a worst case scenario. And I mean, fortunately, through the course of the years, we haven't had a worst case scenario. But that doesn't mean that we couldn't. I mean, I remember the year that we had an additional congressional race in '09 that we hadn't planned on. So, you know, when you look at '09 and that was where it was expensive, that was because we ran an additional election that year. We had to run a congressional election that year because Senator Gillibrand, who had been in Congress, was moved up to the U.S. Senate, and then we had to run a congressional race.
$11,000 more than you spent.
But everything is more expensive now. In '09, we didn't have the new voting systems. We didn't have to buy a paper ballot per voter. I mean, you look at that, and we put those out to bid. So I mean, we're doing it based on what the low bid was. and it's 47 cents a ballot,
You'll get
because we
funded.
have to have them that meet the state requirements. There are certain procedures that we have to follow, and, I would love
I don't wanna-
to be able to do it on how we hope it will go. Unfortunately, that's not what we're supposed to be doing as commissioners.
Well, that's my reasoning, when I look back over 8 years, and I see that we have up to $17,500 more than we've ever spent, and I got people that wanna fund college, and I wanna fund fire alarms, and I wanna fund this, and fund that, I think that is what it should be.
Well, and I mean, certainly we can understand where you're coming from, and I think when we were at our different committee meetings and the budget team, we were able to go into more depth over what it is we have to do and why we have to do it. So, we're letting you know that we are short $65,000. How the committee or how the board chooses to handle it, that's entirely up to them. I just know that for us, the time that we're going to discover this crunch is going to be our busiest time. So, to be able to do all of the things that we need to do, I mean, they ask us to prepare our POs in January, which we do. I mean, we know that we're gonna have the movers, and we know that we're gonna, I mean, that's fact. And that's one of the additional expenses, was moving the voting system. I mean, that's only been within the last 6 years.
That was the only thing we actually increased,
Right,
was
was our voting
contracts.
costs for the transporting of the voting systems for that fourth election. And again, that goes out to bid. So, I mean, we're trying to do everything we can, and we're stingy. I mean, we sit and we really figure out exactly how we can save money, whether it's a certain town that has a lesser, contentious election event and potentially fewer people showing up to vote. We take that into consideration. But who knew? I mean, you could have had a supervisor's race in every single town that was contested, so we would have had to have had the money to be able to produce, probably 60-70% of the potential voter turnout. Luckily we didn't have that. So, and I mean, how we kind of look at it is, we're obligated to prepare for a worst case scenario, knowing that if that doesn't happen and we're still just as stingy, that the money goes back to the county. I mean, it doesn't stay in our department, it goes back. So, it may not be in this calendar year, but it would be the next calendar year, that money, is back in the funds. So, we are frugal, we don't just order to order, but we do have to prepare for a worst case scenario. That's our job. Just as Mr. Thomas's job is to do it to the lesser degree, and we're certainly not, we're not saying that that's not a correct thing. It's just, I wish we'd had an opportunity to maybe.
As far as you not being notified, I'll take full responsibility for that.
And we know how busy you are. You're busy too, and so I mean, it was just one of those things where I think we could have explained like we did today.
Now, the budget, it was presented to the budget committee, and if you wanna go back and look at the video, that you do, on 10/27, about 30 minutes in, you'll see where I talked about this. And it was also listed on the sheet. I'm not exactly sure what the sheet handed out to the budget committee, but it was on the sheet here. It was the 5th item down, so it's not, it's not like a big surprise, I don't think. But that was my reasoning for doing that.
Bud?
Mary Beth, how do you, Frank said, if you need the money, you're gonna get it from the board. How do you respond to his comment that if you need the money, you come back to the board and you'll be able to take it out of contingency? I mean, it solves all the problems without.
So again, we're doing our POs in January to cover ballots, say, for the 4 elections. And then I haven't been through it before, but my understanding is we're gonna have to take time out of our time in our busiest time, July and August, to come to present our problem to you, to try to get that money to pay our bills for September, October, November.
I think, any of the supervisors that are sole town supervisors, like Evelyn, myself, Frank, Ron, know that a budget is a evolving thing throughout the year, and you see it at the county level. You're constantly amending the county budget. That being said, you're gonna be able to pay for what you need to pay for. However, I think we have a good team in place at the Board of Elections. I don't think they ask for funding that they don't really think they need. And I don't think that filling holes with contingency and knowing you're gonna have to do it this early in the process is a way to operate. So, I welcome further comments. Rachel, do you have anything to add to this?
Well, as you know, I sent an email out to our support services, committee after Mary Beth reached out to me the other day, and, I think my concern was, she came to committee, as Frank's indicated, that was another layer of transparency this year, and as a committee, we heard her rationale, both of your rationale on why this was so important, so I was surprised that when it went back to budget, there was still an additional cut after the detailed explanation that we had heard at committee, and I believe, and I could be wrong, but that our committee actually voted on it. I know our county administrators told me that's a step that wasn't necessary, it was for information only. But and maybe we didn't, I know we had a lot of discussions about it. But I'm hard pressed to believe that anything is still the same price that it was in 2009, and that, I don't know about, the number of registered voters, but I know many committees have worked very hard to increase the number of new registered voters. I think that's probably increasing all the time.
We'll see it this
especially the
year.
presidential. So, I think we're asking for them to jump through more hoops when in January they need to start their process. And, they're already at a disadvantage, but that communication is a huge one, and, I've had discussions with our chairman about it, and I just think moving forward that being able to communicate directly with department heads on, a little bit more about why either there's an increase or a decrease or what's going on. And I appreciate your comments on that, Frank. I'm glad we were able to have that discussion, Mary Beth, but I would like to see that funding somehow added back to our budget so that it isn't a matter of jumping through hoops, and as she's indicated, every year if there's money left over, it goes right back to the county. But they have to do their job.
Right.
Yeah, well, then I got a suggestion, then after the first of the year, then you appropriate whatever committee thinks you need out of the fund balance, and put it back in the budget, for budget, and there you go. And that way, we're not taxing people again for something that we're not gonna spend.
Well, I don't think, well, I don't know for sure, but I don't know of any of the committee members that were advocating trying to amend the budget at this point, but after the first of the year, we can make a recommendation, or we could make it now, and push this on to finance to put that money back in.
I was gonna say, let's refer it over to finance for the first of the year, and have them have a look at it then. I think it's gonna have to go through finance anyway, so it might be fine to get it on as a referral right now if we could, and after the first of the year, we'll let finance take it up.
Okay, you wanna make that as a motion?
I'll make that as a motion.
Second by Rachel. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carried. Are you through?
Yes, thank you.
Thank
Sure.
you.
For now.
Okay. It's all yours.
All right.
I didn't make a 2-minute meeting this morning.
I'll fly right through this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the county administrator's agenda this morning, there are 2 items. The first item is to renew the mail pickup and sorting services we have with Mailings Made Easy. A number of years ago, we entered into a contract with Mailings Made Easy because what we did is we streamlined our mail room, our print shop, and a variety of other offices to save money. And after evaluation, Mailings Made Easy, actually it wasn't necessarily Mailings Made Easy, but a mail pickup service, indicated to us that it would save money. And so we went with it. It's been very successful. And so we put it back out to bid this past year. And the bids came in, and I did include for you the changes in the pricing. Well, first of all, let me back up. We only got 1 bid from Mailings Made Easy, and although I hear there's another organization that does it, they didn't submit a bid, but I think it may be because they're further south, and maybe it's not in their interest, but we did only get 1 bid. This was put out by purchasing, and the bid that came back shows a slight increase in the various categories that I set forth. I won't go back through them for you right now unless you'd like to. and we'd be recommending then the renewal of this contract. Again, the term would be January 1st, 2016 through December 31st, 2018.
Make a motion to approve that.
By Evelyn, second by Bud. Discussion? All in favor? Motion carried.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the second item that we have on the agenda today is the Workplace Violence Prevention Plan and Program. As your county administrator, one of the tasks that are assigned to me is on an annual basis to review the workplace violence reports that come in during the year. I put together a team recently because, as I understand my obligations under the law, I'm supposed to do that. So I put together a team. We reviewed the various workplace violence reports. The purpose of the review was to see if we're addressing them appropriately, to see if there's anything new we can change or learn from them going forward. The group found generally that they were all appropriately handled. But as a result of all of that review, and mainly as a result of my personal review, I felt that our workplace violence policy needed some changes. One of the things I found was in the printed version of the workplace violence policy that the programs that were scheduled for some of the buildings were left, and if you looked at the original one, you would see they were just kind of left open. It turned out that that was because when the law was adopted, they were open at that time, but it was immediately thereafter taken care of by Amy Clute. And so it was a matter of making sure our workplace violence plan was brought up to date to show that those things had occurred. So that was one of the areas of changes, so really more just a correction type activity. Another area that I found, though, was when I read through our plan, it did not appear to me to comply with the labor law provisions that require or allow for an employee to go to the Commissioner of Labor as a last resort. This is the New York State Commissioner of Labor if the particular workplace item is not addressed. When I saw that, I sent that down to the Attorney's Office to ask them to review that and, if appropriate, write that up into the law, which they did. And then the other thing I did was to clarify some of the ways that we do things in the county in terms of handling the items. So those are the big areas, but just walk you through it. Everybody should have highlighted in red the changes. So if you flip through the pages, for instance, you'll see on the first page, 4, would be the first time you see any red. You would see that those are risk factors identified in the sections, and what we did is added the offices that should be added in that instance. And then we also made some changes in terms of who has constant contact with the public and revised those sections to be consistent with what we have up above. On page 5, you'll see that's the next area of changes that we made. Big paragraph lighted in red, but this identifies the formal reviews with written reports and who they are filed to. One of the changes, for instance, is to make sure the Human Resources Director is in that pipeline, because they weren't clearly before. So we wanted to make sure that we had, and then also to outline, I thought it was important to outline in here this annual review, because it wasn't in the plan, and I only found it because I went through and reviewed the laws and everything else that we have that are applicable to this, and I said, in the future, it would be nice if it's in the plan so that it would be clear to whoever may be county administrator at some point in the future, they would know that they need to do this. Another change on that page, you'll see we provide a report to the department head, Human Resource Director, and Self-Insurance Administrator in terms of the Sheriff's report. We felt that it wasn't clear that that would go back to the department head, and felt that that was very important. The next change you'll see is on page 7. This is the part that I asked the County Attorney's Office to look at in terms of bringing in the Commissioner review appeal. And then on page 8, you'll see this is where we updated the risk control measures. This was something, as I mentioned, was already done, but it needed to be shown in this on page 8, so you'll see all those items where it says see attached building summary. And those were all the changes. The county attorney is here today in the event that there should be any legal questions regarding this particular plan or program. We are required to have it by law, and Mr. Chairman, maybe the attorney could comment on whether he feels at this point that this complies with the requirements of law.
I do.
Almost the most succinct thing I've ever heard an attorney say.
I agree.
Almost sort of like Calvin Coolidge. Any
Yeah,
questions?
have there been any incidents or examples of workplace violence?
Yes, we have a few, unfortunately, that happen each year. Some are threatening phone calls. Some are reports of threat that somebody wants to come here and do something. We've actually had those. When we get something that is of the nature that somebody's going to come here and do something, or it could happen at another site too. We had one that happened at another site this past year where the report came that they were at another site, but they were threatening our site, that what they would do if certain things happen. So what we do in those cases, we take those very seriously. The department head typically will be the first to find out about them. They reach out to me. We had one with one department head, and the first thing we did was call the sheriff's office to get them involved, because we don't want to take a chance that somebody does something, obviously, that threatens the safety of or harms somebody in our buildings. And then what we do is, involving the sheriff, we also come up with a plan. One particular instance resulted in a few steps being taken to make sure that the employee who was affected was safe and felt safe with the measures that we had. So we do take these extremely seriously. I have the ability to, and I have on at least one occasion, pulled in the sheriff, the county attorney. I had a group meeting on one because I felt it was of the magnitude that warranted making sure that we didn't miss anything that we should be doing to respond to these. Now, in today's day and age, I got to tell you this, and that's why I spent so much time on this. That's why I went back through this policy. As your county administrator, I feel that this is one of those, big responsibilities that I do not want to mess up on, and I want to make sure it's handled right.
Yes, Jim.
Sort of a tangential question. Are there any unresolved threats? I mean, where we didn't find the person, or?
Well, I mean, when you say, in my mind, when I think of unresolved, did we satisfactorily address them, which is why I have that annual review? I think all to date have been satisfactorily resolved. Are there instances where the person was never located? Absolutely. In fact, I can think of one that made a threat, but the person was known to be out of state. And to my knowledge, I've never heard that they came into state, but that was one of the factors that the police weighed as far as the likelihood of something happening. But to make absolutely sure, that was a case where we made sure that the security people at social service or at the Human Services building were aware of who this person was, photographs, things like that to make sure. But when you resolve these types of threats, if it looks like the person's not going to come back into the state, then that's part of the resolution. But I guess to your point, we didn't find that person. We didn't actually address that person, but rather we addressed the situation.
Yes, Rachel.
Mr. Chairman, is this something that has to be voted on this month? I understand that you've made some suggestions in the revisions, and I'd like a little more time to look at it. Is there a way to look at this in January, then bring it to the full board?
I don't have a timeline. No, I've done my part to.
Because I was looking at this as homework.
Sure.
Jim knows what homework means.
Not anymore.
So, at our next meeting.
That would be fine with me, Mr. Chairman, certainly. If the county attorney doesn't see a problem.
I don't see a problem.
Okay. Anything else to come before the committee?
Yeah, actually, I think, if I may, Mr. Chairman?
You certainly may.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, I just wanted to inform you that there will be some significant changes at the county attorney's office in 2016. Obviously, I will not be there, and as you may know, Shelley Van Nostrand is going with me to Supreme Court. Her new title will be Secretary to the Justice. Prior to any of this, you may have also been aware that Terry McGarr announced her retirement. She's retiring effective January 15th. And then not long ago, Amy Bartlett announced that she is also retiring. She's retiring effective January, I think it's the 30th, but I think her last day of work will be January 29. So there will be a lot of new faces at the County Attorney's Office in 2016 and beyond. We have, with the assistance of Jackie and with Paul, we have been interviewing some candidates to fill Terry's position, as that was noticed as an upcoming vacancy. And as you may recall, what we did there was, in order to plan ahead, we actually, it was Paul's suggestion, what we actually did there is we actually presented that in a way so that whoever the new person is that is selected to fill that spot would be able to come in and work with Terry and with Shelley for a little while. Amy and I have had, again, with the assistance of Jackie, we have interviewed, I interviewed one candidate with Amy. Amy interviewed another candidate. I had to be at a meeting for that other interview. But I'm pleased to say that we have excellent candidates to fill these positions. And I'm going to be working with Paul and with Jackie today, tomorrow, to figure out what we want to do going forward with respect to these openings. Obviously, the opening for Terry has been noticed. I don't think we've officially noticed an opening for Shelley, and whether or not we do that is something that I'll be talking to Paul about, and that's how I'd like to handle that, if that's okay. Again, you know, there'll be a lot of new faces, and at the County Attorney's Office, and I also wanted to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the committee members here at Support Services. I haven't asked for a lot. I don't think I've asked for a lot over the course of my years here, but every time that I have asked for something, you've been very receptive, you've been very understanding and accommodating, you've given me good ideas, and I'm very appreciative of that, and I want to thank you for that. So, thank you.
Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Oh, may I ask a question before we adjourn, please?
No, I asked for a motion to adjourn, Rachel.
And
Weren't you listening?
I'm trying hard.
Okay.
I'm sure you'll be discussing that personnel. I just wondered if I could get a status update with the filling of the county attorney's position. I know you guys closed out applications on the 27th, and that at I forget what committee meeting, but you indicated we'd all get copies of the resumes, and just looking to plan ahead so I could be there for interviews. I don't know if you have a date or what's going on with that.
I sent out an email, or actually asked Amanda to send it out as part of her report, but there is 3 resumes plus another proposal that we have received. My thought is to send this out to you ahead of time. I was going to try to get that out either today or tomorrow at the latest to all supervisors so they could review these resumes well in advance of the Personnel Committee. And then my thought is that we could have a discussion at the Personnel Committee on what everybody would like to do. I think that there are a number of ways that we can proceed at this point, and it would certainly be, you know, up to the board on how you'd like to handle this. So I would suspect that there may be a combination of things that happen at the Personnel Committee in terms of probably some open meeting discussions. There may be some executive session discussions, especially in as much as it deals with the particular applicants and whether, you know, how you want to proceed with regard to them. So that would be my thought on this, and then we could it'll be kind of like Wednesday, trying to figure out where you want to go from here. We did not get as many resumes as we did the last time. I had hoped for more. You know, there is sometimes when you don't get as many as you would like, one of the other options, and I think I did mention this earlier too, is whether we go back out again to solicit more, but that would be up to the board in the end to decide after you've reviewed it and had a chance to talk amongst yourselves.
I did get that email, so, which is better track record than some other things, but, are there any more comments? 'Cause I thought a little bit about, an appointment of this consequence and magnitude, whether that's something that the incoming board, might wanna have a say in. But that was before I realized the magnitude of the transition and the switch over, and there's not gonna be a lot of institutional memory, left in that department, or any, so,
Could we certainly invite the new board members to participate in the interviews then, or you can't do that?
well, I know that, there was a case 4 years ago where the new incoming supervisors, there was a request to have them sit in on an executive session, and it was termed that wasn't appropriate, so I don't know,
Well, I mean, I guess I'd have to go back and look at that. I mean, as I think about it, and I don't know what process you used last time. I remember coming to interviews, but I don't.
this was entirely different,
Okay.
so.
But as I think about it, you know, the only difference would be, is that you would expect a quorum, and it would be a meeting, an official meeting of the board. How many supervisors show up, who knows, but you would be expecting at least a quorum to show up. And, it would be for the express purpose of going into an executive session, to interview candidates, for a particular position. So as I sit here, Supervisor, I don't think there's anything that would say that you can't do it that way. Whether or not you want to do it that way, or whether or not the board wants to do it that way, is entirely up to the board. I know sometimes there's and again, I don't know what the process was here, but sometimes there's a committee that could be appointed of certain supervisors who would be appointed for purposes by the chair as a special committee for purposes of conducting the interviews or overseeing the interview process and reporting back to the personnel committee. But, you know, there would be nothing that would say that the personnel committee could not convene for this express purpose, go into executive session, interview the candidates, invite all other supervisors in. Nothing wrong with that, from my perspective.
I think the question that Rachel had, though, is she wants the supervisors-elect, those not yet sworn in, to sit
Oh, I
in.
didn't hear that. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear that.
I assumed all supervisors could attend the
Okay,
interviews.
I didn't hear that.
I'm just asking new supervisors, because Ron's concern, and I think it's a valid one, is that they're gonna be working with the new county attorney, and the time frame is so close.
There is one, and just in fairness to Martin, so he knows, I did get in one a request that under FOIL, it not be released to the public. So, to the extent that they're not sitting supervisors, that may be problematic, but I'll defer to Martin. I just didn't want him to be hit blindly, because he doesn't know that yet. But there, you know, so I think, I mean, from a personal standpoint, I certainly don't have an issue with it, but legally, I don't know if you're gonna have some problems.
Well, this previous incident was a full board sitting, and it was a settlement issue regarding the former social services director. And, there was initially a thought that the supervisors-elect could stay in the room while the discussion was going on, and then it was determined that that wasn't appropriate. It's somewhat different, but there may be a blanket rule.
I mean, it seems to me you can invite anyone into an executive session. It should be recognized that they're being invited in to the executive session. So again, as a matter of law, I don't think there's anything wrong with supervisors-elect being in on these meetings. It may be uncustomary, it may be unusual, and I think it's something that should be discussed by the personnel committee as to whether or not that should occur, but I'm limited to letting you know whether or not if there's something legally impermissible about it. No, I don't think there is.
So, when does personnel meet? The 9th?
9th or the 10th, something like that? Yeah. 10th?
Next week.
Next week.
You said something about the FOIL issue, I mean, with the,
Well, I mean.
That's, releasing resumes to the general public.
Yeah, I know that, I'm just saying how,
I would
if we
have to, I wanted to make sure that, I mean, that may be a wrinkle that I'm gonna have to take a look at as county attorney, but I
Right.
wanted to make sure that I answered the pure legal question, and that's the pure legal question, as presented. Whether or not there's something in FOIL, here that I would have to address with respect to confidentiality, I can do that and I can advise Paul.
Well, we can encrypt it and then release it.
Could we just maybe be prepared then to discuss that at personnel, you know, maybe it's a matter of someone signing a confidentiality agreement, whatever it might be, but is that something that you can throw in the agenda to talk about?
Personnel is a night.
Anything else? Yes, Matt?
With respect to Evelyn's comment yesterday, if you're gonna talk for an hour, make it an hour meeting instead of half an hour meeting, 'cause I'm a half an hour behind right now, and I
My last month's meeting was 2 minutes, this one's gonna be about an hour and 2 minutes. Go figure.
I think this is the first time you've gone over.
That's 9:30 Central Time.
Yeah, she doesn't have time zone up there. Relax. Go get a cup of coffee.
Yours have never gone over, Matt, in health services ever.
I'm trying to give Don something to write about.
Did we adjourn?
What does this mean?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Motion by Evelyn, second by Peter. Do I have a travel thing to sign, or?
I didn't know she gave you the original.
Matt, you better hurry